Okay, so what on earth does a post-war French philosopher have to do with the corporate strategy of someone like Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot. Let's get into this really unexpected connection.
So, The Economist comes out with this pretty bold claim. If you want to understand how modern companies control their own story, you don't need a fancy business consultant. No, you need the philosopher Michel Foucault.
All right, let's explore this. It's this strange and powerful place where, abstract philosophy has some very, very real-world business applications.
Foucault's whole big idea was this: the way you organize and present information isn't neutral. It is, in and of itself, a form of power. And it's a principle that America's biggest bosses get deep down, and they use it all the time to shape how we see their companies.
And what's the main tool they use to wield all this power? Well, it all comes down to something pretty simple but incredibly profound: the power of categories.
Foucault was obsessed with what he called taxonomies. And that's really just a fancy word for how we classify things to make sense of the world around us. He argued that these categories we use, they're not natural. They're totally human inventions designed, as he put it, to tame the wild profusion of existing things.
And this analogy just drives the point home perfectly. Just imagine a supermarket, but instead of being organized by food type, it's organized by the date something was produced. You'd have lettuce and the New York Times sitting next to each other in one aisle, and then, I don't know, Scotch and Celine Dion DVDs in another. It sounds completely nuts, right? But it just goes to show you how arbitrary our systems for sorting things really are.
So, okay, that's the theory. How is this power actually used in the real world? Well, it's kind of like a two-sided coin. You're either using it to hide your flaws, or you're using it to highlight your strengths.
This is just a brilliant example of the defensive game. Companies use these really bland, generic categories to kind of paper over some unflattering details. So Indian IT giants, they offer solutions. That sounds a lot better than work we outsource to Mumbai, doesn't it? Or Wall Street firms, they'll lump their risky trading profits in with stable fees to make everything seem less dangerous. It's all about controlling the story.
But listen, the real masters of this stuff, they don't just play defense. They go on offense. They actively reshape their own categories to completely bend the perceptions of investors and the public.
I mean, a truly dazzling case is Jeff Bezos at Amazon. Back in early 2015, investors were getting really worried, seeing Amazon as just this big, low-margin retail store. So what does Bezos do? He changes the taxonomy. He breaks out AWS, the cloud business, into its very own category. And bam, all of a sudden, everyone could see this hidden engine of massive growth and high cash flow. The stock price just took off.
And of course, that AWS technique started spreading like wildfire. Uber began telling analysts to split its business by city and how long they'd been operating there, just to show that its oldest markets were actually profitable. And who can forget WeWork? They literally invented a new metric, community-adjusted EBITDA. By creating their own special measurement, they could argue their core business was profitable and ready to scale up.
But this goes way beyond just reorganizing a few divisions. The most skilled corporate taxonomists, well, they play a much bigger game. They reclassify their entire company.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. Why would a company as huge and dominant as Google suddenly change its whole name and structure to become something called Alphabet? What was that about?
Okay, so here's the playbook. The big problem for Google was that Wall Street saw it as a one-trick pony, totally dependent on search ads. So they created a brand new taxonomy. Google became the reliable cash cow that just prints money, while all the crazy futuristic projects, driverless cars and stuff, became other bets. And this showed investors a really serious, organized framework for innovation, and they absolutely loved it.
But you could argue that the original master of this is Warren Buffett. He has always insisted that Berkshire Hathaway isn't a conglomerate and it's not an investment fund. He calls it a one-off that you can only analyze using his own special set of rules. He basically created a unique category just for his company, shielding it from typical Wall Street analysis for decades.
And more recently, Masayoshi Son of SoftBank pulled off a very similar kind of mental leap. His company was getting criticized for weak cash flow, so he just started redescribing it as a venture capital operation. Why? Because then it could be judged by a much more flattering and honestly less verifiable metric of investment profitability.
But according to our source material, if you want to see this strategy pushed to its absolute logical extreme, well, then you have to look at Elon Musk.
Just think about it for a second.
even when Tesla was struggling to produce a pretty small number of cars, Wall Street kept this weirdly stable sales forecast of $60 billion. How? Because Musk doesn't ask you to judge Tesla by what it is today, a car company. No, he demands that you judge it by what it will be, an AI and energy company. He literally recategorizes the present with the future.
So, is this all just an illusion? A big game of smoke and mirrors? Let's talk about where that illusion hits reality and where the real power is.
So here's the crucial point. This whole strategy has its limits. Creating new categories isn't alchemy. If a company doesn't actually succeed, if the numbers don't add up, eventually there's nowhere left to hide.
And we've seen it fail. General Electric, they tried to rebrand parts of their huge empire as high-tech, but investors just looked at the falling profits and weren't fooled. The company even got booted from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. IBM tried a similar thing, but it couldn't hide from its overall performance. At the end of the day, reality always gets a vote. The story has to match the results.
But let's not downplay the power here, because when this works, controlling how your firm is classified can fundamentally change how people see you. And that change in perception has huge real-world consequences. It can mean a lower cost of capital, a higher stock price, and yeah, it can even intimidate your competitors.
Which brings us right back to the beginning. The Economist suggests that if Foucault himself were looking at the business world today, he might come up with his own new, very simple taxonomy to classify every single company out there.
He'd probably split them into just two groups, those that understand the power of these taxonomies and those that don't. So now that you've seen the playbook, the question really is, as you look at the world of business, which is which?